Welcome to Binge Worthy Podcast. I am your co-host, G. Oliver. I am here with Nate Kauser, and this is the podcast where we'll review and highlight the historical, social context of film, TV, and theater. Welcome back,
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Tuesday. What's up, Nate?
It's going to sound a little windy for a couple seconds. It got really hot and I got lightheaded. So I don't want to pass out for the sake of a show. So it's just going to sound a little windy. My mic will pick up a little wind.
Right.
But this is episode number 6. So we're over halfway through this first season, and we've seen some really great movies. The interesting thing is in us planning out the season, and we both pick things based on a certain criteria that we set up, and even with the selections that we've both been making, I've been in my mind thinking of other combinations of films. We just had a episode where we did all musicals, and that was my love because I love musicals. And now I have George on board. He's becoming a lover of musicals as well.
I am.
But we're
Carmen Jones. If y'all ain't seen it, y'all better go check it out.
I think the red lipstick got him. I think that's what it was. I think
It might have been Dorothy Dandridge, boys. Shoo.
Because when
Yeah.
people think of Dorothy Dandridge, they think of Halle Berry. They don't think of Dorothy Dandridge. And when you see how naturally pretty she is, I mean, Halle Berry is naturally beautiful as well, but you just see her.
And also, the musicals, they just offer this range that you don't get in your everyday movies, right? Like,
because
it forces
you to think a little bit.
Acting is hard, but acting, singing, and then having intentional movement, and sometimes that means a full on dance, right?
Yeah.
But even outside of that, if it's not a full on dance, there's a choreographed movement, right?
Have you ever been in a musical?
Oh my Lord, yo. Let me tell you something. The two hardest and just the two hardest plays that I've ever done was a play called the first one is a play called Yellow Man.
Okay.
And I did a show called Yellow Man, and Yellow Man is what's Rosalind. Called that was directed by Rosalind. Performed at the Arena Players. Okay. And Yellow Man is what's called a memory play.
Yeah.
And a memory play is where you have characters that are in the present, but they also either recalling things from memory, and which are also played out on the stage, right? So they're not just talking about it or like theatrically thinking about it when they are doing things from them from what has come before. You're actually playing it out. So in this play Yellow Man, in the present day, I am a grown man who is it's a story about two young Black people who have been in love since childhood. And in the memory part of it, like, we actually go back to depicting ourselves as children. So and then in that, you also, in this particular play, and I don't know if all memory plays are like this, but in addition to playing my younger self, I also am kind of like, it's me interacting with myself, but in different characters. So my father and my mother and my brother and so you're simultaneously like depicting multiple characters in one scene, right? That was the second hardest play. I mean, just like it was, theater is one of those things where you get done and you're like physically exhausted, right?
Well,
And in
that
this,
style of theater
mhm,
mixed with Rosalind working the hell out of you,
absolutely
uh,
right.
it,
Like
it
I
it lends itself to
remember,
that. Those plays normally you're normally double up
yeah,
on your characters when you're
exactly.
dealing with that
So,
type of play.
like, that was a play where routinely every performance, like, I had to take a moment backstage after the bows and everything where I'm just collecting myself because I'm like physically burnt out. And next to that, the most difficult play that I ever did was Charlie Brown.
Hmm.
You're a good man, Charlie Brown, at Coppin at Coppin State University.
Hmm.
Um, it was, and that was just a musical. I played Linus, and just every, it was a full-on musical. Like, so every 5 minutes there was a song number, and most of the cast was involved in those song numbers, including my solo, which was like My Blanket and Me. And it was just like the moving, like you have to move but you have to sing. Yeah, musicals just is a different animal.
It's
It's just
actually
different, and it's very, very difficult. Like I that's where my appreciation for musicals really came from,
right.
and recognizing initially just how difficult it really was, and then to watch these people who are well versed and well cultured in musical theater, they make it seem so easy.
Well, that's just
Like you,
rehearsal, and
yeah.
for me, I up into the end of high school, that's all I ever did. I think I did maybe one regular I'm not regular, but non-musical play
Mm-hmm.
all the way up into high school. And then I didn't really start doing regular plays, quote unquote regular plays, until college and beyond. So musicals, it's you have to have stamina, and uh, it's the rehearsal process is really the
Grueling.
doozy, because that's
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of movement and a lot of rehearsing and repetitive movement.
Yeah.
And if you have a good director, it will always be
Right.
repetitive. I know
They're gonna pull
Rosalind,
it out of you.
right? Rosalind is not a repetitive director, so she's not gonna keep going over the same stuff. She gonna
Mm-hmm.
move on, and it's gonna be short to the point. Let's move on to the next thing, and you got to be able to retain all of that music, song, character, all those things in one time. I love musical theater for that that reason, because you always have to keep moving. Musicals is moving, whereas though a
Mm-hmm.
regular play can feel like, come on now, is it 2 hours already? Like, let's get out of here. But musicals, you'll do more than 2 hours and you'll find yourself just moving the whole time. You never really get to really settle
Yeah.
in a comfortable zone when dealing with a
That's
musical. So
absolutely
I love it
right.
for that reason. But
Mm. So
we have
that
another
was our last episode. So like, if you want to hear more about just the musical
Mhm.
aspect of film and theater, and particularly like black film and theater, definitely check out episode 5.
Right.
Um,
I question before we move on to
yeah.
what we're doing today. How many people did you tell outside of you writing it on your post about Carmen Jones?
So far, I probably about in person like 3 or 4
Uh-huh.
people.
Okay.
And that's only because with COVID, we don't really get a whole,
Yeah.
like social media, I feel like is the primary form of communication
Hmm.
right now, because it's not like, I don't hang out with my friends like I used to and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I did, like the post that I put on my personal Facebook page, and it was like a funny post, and it was intended to be funny.
Hmm.
But I was actually shocked by how many people responded to that post and was
Hmm.
like, "Yo, I love that movie." Like, like, and these were people my age, who
Yeah.
had seen it. And we just got to talking about it. And like the post that I had, it wasn't critical of the movie. It was just, I was just appalled by, not appalled, but like I took issue with the storyline and like one particular character's story arc. but it was in a fun, lighthearted way.
Right.
But it sparked a lot of conversation. And what happened is I got like at least I think I got a list of 3 or 4 musicals that I got to see now,
Yeah.
right? Because of the interaction with that. So if you I think that a lot of people feel like musical theater is like this kind of like on the outskirts type of thing, and it's not. It's just like any other film. If you grew up watching Disney movies, and then now with them doing a lot of live remakes, like those are musicals, right? Like I don't know what it is. Like for some reason they're easier to swallow in animation, maybe. But like
It's
if you
often cheaper
watching,
to
if
make
you
too.
it's cheaper to make, right? Well, because as animation, you're absolutely right. They are cheaper to make. But if you genuinely enjoyed like the music in Disney films, right? Disney animation, and then you're starting to see it now with their live action remakes. Well, you should probably check out some of the other just pure musicals that are out there, right? Like Hamilton is a great. I feel like Hamilton is a great place to start, just because one, if you're a person of color, you know the story, right? Because that's what we were taught initially in history. But then to see it play out with a primarily African American or colored cast, really does in color. I
That's
use colored.
funny.
I use colored just to say that it's not just black people, not colored as in the 1960s. Oh, that's a colored guy.
It's just funny when
I
I
know,
hear
but it's
people
so
say the
weird. It's
word.
so weird to use that word. But I think that there are like whatever your thing is, right? Like you can find it in a musical. Like we were talking about horror or like black comedy in the form of like Little Shop of Horrors, right? If you want to see something that's is really before its time in a lot of respects, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is another one we talked about in our last episode. And then Carmen Jones is like this really great film that starred at the time like 2 of the hottest black
More
actors.
than two.
More than 2, because and
Pearl
that's funny
Bailey
because
and what is her name?
um,
I
there
cannot
was
think of her
quite a
name.
few people in it. And to be honest, yo, like I'm gonna say this, like we know Dorothy Dandridge. I think for a lot of us, we've at least heard that name. And if you are a student of the civil rights movement, then you know who Harry Belafonte is.
Right. But
Whether
this
or
was
not
a
you've seen them
young.
in their element, and they're very much in their element. But then the movie is peppered with these, like at that time, Harry Belafonte and Dorothy Dandridge are like the younger up and coming actors. But then in those supporting roles are all these people that I'd never heard of. But then you start to research and kind of do things, like you find out that these are the OGs back here. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Pearl Bailey,
yeah,
Marilyn Home, Olga James, and there's a
mm-hmm,
number of the actors that we grew up and they were the older guys.
right,
Those were the type of like the
yeah,
I think his name is Brooke Peters. He's
mm-hmm,
normally like the sly character in a lot of the black exploitation
mm-hmm,
movies. People
right,
like him, it really just brought out a lot of individuals. The hoopla around that film, and then we'll get into what we're actually talking about today. The hoopla around that film was Dorothy Dandridge wasn't at the top of the list of people being picked. And many people think, of course she was going to be, in the film, but a lot of people did not think she could pull it off because she was cute. She was, a little girl next door, but nobody thinks she could be sultry. And she was kind of the antagonist in the film, so
yes, she
nobody
was,
thought she could pick it up. But she got into character and stormed into the office and
mm-hmm,
got them on board with her being it. So
yeah.
we're gonna do a part 2. We got another season coming, so we're gonna
Yeah,
do
we
another
definitely gonna
musical
do
season.
another musical one
Because if you like that
in
one, I
next
know some that
season.
you're like.
And truth be told, y'all, like it's a great window into our history.
Mm-hmm.
As Nate really put into perspective in our last episode, was that, you know, when black people were coming up in the theater and trying to make those inroads into the movies, like the musical was really the vehicle for our people. It was definitely where we found our niche and use that as a platform to really like springboard into other areas within the film industry. So the
Mm-hmm.
musical is something that's very, very connected to our history and our struggle um, for acceptance, for our place. You know, however you view the struggle for, you know, like just black liberation, but the musical is very, very much tied into that. So
Right.
Carmen Jones, check it out. It's a great film
So we
for
have
tonight.
a great lineup tonight of
Everybody's favorite
pieces.
hood classic, Boys in the Hood. We talking Free State of Jones. Two of our documentaries for this episode are going to be 13th and the 3 hour behemoth of a documentary, Out of Darkness. We're going to talk the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, produced by Oprah Winfrey. We're going to talk a recent addition to Netflix called Hollywood, and we're going to talk a little bit about the film business. It's a great depiction and a very, very thoughtful depiction of life in early Hollywood. We're going to talk The People versus O.J. Simpson from FX and The Good Place, also a Netflix original.
Mm. And
So
this
let's
is
talk
a
about it.
this lineup to me. I think we're moving more into, well, we've had a healthy balance of what's current and
Mhm.
what has been and kind of everything in between. But as the season goes on, we're going to get real more thematic in terms of what we're seeing and how it relates to the other pieces. We're going to relate them a little bit more. But
Yeah,
I've enjoyed doing the pieces in this way.
yeah. So to kick this off, and just to give you just a preview for y'all who listening of what's coming up. We just had our musical episode, which you hopefully you've listened to already. But coming up, we have a episode that's going to be entirely dedicated to comic book movies and their
Mm-hmm.
influence in popular culture and film, their evolution. We have an episode that is me and Nate. I think we found like a one clear uh, project that we are both very, very into and very passionate about. So we're going to dedicate one whole episode to American Horror Story, not
Yeah.
any particular season, but the entire series to up to date.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to have a season finale. I think is going to be pretty explosive. We're going to talk about race and racial casting and just race in general in the movie industry, the film, TV, all of that in the industry, and how that has affected us, how the evolution of it, what has worked, what has not. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we're gonna have a spirited conversation for our season finale. I'm very, very excited for that. But tonight we're gonna start with the seminal classic, Boys in the Hood, starring Ice Cube, Lawrence Fishburne, Cuba Gooding Jr.,
The infamous Cuba
the,
Gooding
the
Jr.
infamous Cuba Gooding Jr. Lord, we could do a whole episode on him. um, yeah, one of the first films in recent memory that really depicted life on the street, life in the street, like life, you know, as lived by so many young black and in most cases poor or relatively poor youth. Very
Well, I think
insightful
these
film.
films. I think this film had a good cross section of, not the street life, but just how everybody is interconnected within that
And
type of
you're right,
neighborhood.
because everybody wasn't street, right? But to
Right.
live in a specific neighborhood, and I think that you're right, Nate. I think that was a better depiction of like what it means to be black and to
Mm-hmm.
live in a black neighborhood, to come up in a black culture, in a black neighborhood, because
Right.
right, all of these friends, like and even the four friends, right? There was the gangbanger. Well, there was two gangbangers. There was the kid who wasn't really from there, right? But
Right.
had to spend some time with dad, and that's where dad lived. And then you had the athlete who was on his way out, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
of his physical talent.
Right.
So it was a very well-rounded group
But the
that
way
we
you and
followed
it,
throughout the movie.
I'm not faulting you for how you first said it, but that's how we are trained to see us. So you all are in this neighborhood, you all
Mhm.
alike, you all got the same lack of aspiration, you
And
all
nothing could be further from the
right.
truth.
And there's so many different layers. And it's not about getting the outsiders to understand that, because most of them do understand that. They just choose to keep everybody in a box. And that's why movies like this are so, in terms of the love and admiration that people have for it, it speaks to being boxed in.
Mm,
And often the good guy dies and the bad guy lives on, and everybody in between is still suffering.
right.
And I don't personally like these types of movies
But
because
this didn't have that ending or that
no, I'm
trajectory,
just
so to
saying
speak.
the movies in this
Mhm.
vein. So there's been a lot of
Yeah.
movies like this and Juice and a number of other movies. All of them are a little bit different. But
Right,
my
right,
my
right.
point was to say it's not the movie. I can appreciate art, but my issue is always I've always felt boxed in because often who I was never really was depicted in any of these films, like the person other than like the person who they were the one that was being bused to a private school somewhere, but that
Mhm.
wasn't the typical character, and that was normally like a throwaway character. So I never
Right.
saw myself in these films, so I never really enjoyed watching them.
Okay. Nate, where were you bust to?
Say it again.
Like, where were you bust to?
So I went
I
to
know.
Archbishop
I
Curley.
Oh, you went
So
to Curly,
I went to that was my high school. I went to St. Ignatius,
St.
that was my
Ignatius.
middle school.
Right. Mhm.
Um, and I went to a charter school for elementary school. But so I my representation was limited in many of these pieces because I was normally the character that would have gotten tragically shot trying to get ahead, and I
or
just
or
didn't
maybe
like
or
that.
maybe or maybe your character is the one. Maybe you are how do you say maybe you are represented, right? Like you're the one that's not there,
Yeah, and that's
right?
that's that's what I felt. I never felt the connection
Hmm.
to what I was seeing,
Oh
or
no,
I
I
was the
mean
one
like
that was
and well, what I'm saying is I'm connecting it to like real life. Like
right.
we were literally the ones that weren't there, right?
Yeah,
Like because
the career students.
I went right, exactly. Like I was away in another country for
Hmm.
most of middle school, and
Hmm.
then also went to a private school. Uh, Once I got back, I was
Hmm.
accepted into a private school. So a lot of when these things that
You
happen,
better not say Kenya. Was that
yeah,
the school you went to?
yeah, it was
I'm a little perturbed, but I'll tell you about that after the fact. Go
okay.
ahead, go ahead.
So, so yeah, I'm a Baraka boy. Um,
Uh-huh.
so, so, so maybe we're represented in the fact that we're not represented because we weren't there.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right,
Like
right.
there's, like, and I'll say that like my sister and I had a conversation. And my sister is a Mervo graduate, right? She
Okay.
went to Chickapin for a little
Hmm.
while. Um, and all those years that I was gone, and it was interesting. Like a few years ago, me and my sister had a conversation, and the conversation was about like why we aren't as close as we were when we were kids. And my sister really kind of nailed it home for me. She was like, George, like our formative years, you were gone. You know what I mean? And it had never really dawned on me up until that point that she's absolutely right. Like when we were going through some of those like real changes that
formative years,
right? Those formative years, we were apart, right? Like I went to a private school where I boarded for 5 days out of the week. So I came home on weekends, but then that was it. And that's not really a relationship. You know what I'm saying? That's not enough time to really develop a real relationship. So yeah, maybe that's what it is. It's like that friend that would be there, but it's not.
But some of us, and for me, I kept the path going in that direction. I never related to those individuals. And I remember growing up in neighborhoods where there were, like, I think out of the neighborhood I grew up in initially, probably only one person got out in the typical story. That was Carmelo Anthony. He got out of the neighborhood, and you saw his kind of growth out of the neighborhood. But most of the other people were either killed or drug dealers, or just went on and led like a semi-normal quote unquote life. But these films, and I don't blame these films, but that's why I always argue the point. I want to see other possibilities, because there are young people like us, you know, who were put in situations where we had to be young men at a very young age academically. And often we keep seeing films that only show us the reality from a certain perspective, and it's not the whole scope of that reality, and it does not give a lot of those individuals an option to do something else,
right?
Unless they are too far gone and they have to do something else. So that's all. If my argument always seems in that space, it's because I always wanted to see a Barack Obama, even if it wasn't physically a Barack Obama. And I think I was more prepared for him than people 3 times my age was. So I like to see options. I like to see potential. I like to see stuff that we don't typically get to see. We walked out. I lived on Myrtle Avenue, like Myrtle and Dolphin, and then I lived on Forest Park off of Garrison, and we kept moving further and further out.
Yeah.
From down the downtown area. So I understood what it was like to walk out your neighborhood. There was a project, like literally the 2 last standing projects in the city was looking out my my bedroom window, or what I saw when I sit on the steps.
Yeah.
So I would see these things, and I just wanted to see something different. And there was always a character in these movies that wanted that different, but circumstance made it impossible. It was always something blocking it, but it was never an option to say, well, this is what you can do. And then we start seeing the characters being added that was in college or going to college, but that character will always get tragically shot and killed, or got into trouble, made a wrong turn and got. So it was like, I'm stuck here. This is purgatory. So how do I get out of this? And many of us, we have to find our way the hard way, because it's really nobody. I don't know many people in my family that went to college. Not saying anything about their intelligence, but I didn't know that was a possibility for me. Even going to the schools that I went to, it just wasn't. It's possible. So I enjoyed the film, but it did take me back to that growing up watching films like this, like actually this film, and watching these films and feeling like I don't relate to these people.
I so I always felt like this film scared me. I can say that. Like when I first saw it, I feel like there was an instance of fear in it, and
Mm-hmm.
it was all around that boxed in
Mm-hmm.
feeling. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like the boxed in feeling of the movie, because I feel like all of them had dreams and aspirations beyond where they lived,
yeah.
right?
We all
Um,
do. The perception is we don't.
even in the characters that acted as if they didn't, right?
Right.
I feel like sometimes that was the biggest indicator that, like, yeah, you know, you want to get up out of here.
Those
Um,
characters
but
often
I
live
remember,
vicariously through the other characters, and you
right,
would notice that.
right, and I remember the father, who was played by Lawrence Fishburne, kind
Mm-hmm.
of pulled everybody in, and he kind of broke it down on this level that even as a young man, I realized, I was like, the people he talking to can't do nothing about that.
Nope.
Like in their immediate circumstance and their immediate, like what they're going through right now, like they can't do anything about what he's talking about. And he was talking about gentrification, right? He was talking about the practice of like devaluing a neighborhood
Right.
so that you can buy it cheap, right? And then maneuvering conditions in the neighborhood so that the value would go up,
Yeah.
right?
But he was planting that seed in them, and
But he
often
was right,
people did not. People don't see that seed blossom until they.
and yeah, until you older, and like I
Yeah.
think now I understand that. But when I remember watching this as a young man, I remember thinking to myself, I was like, damn, yo, like it almost presented as a, you know, like this is an impossible situation, you know what I mean? And I was young at the time, so like, you
Yeah.
know, it's not wild for a young man to look at that and say, and especially if you have a certain amount of knowledge about certain things where you could really understand and kind of in the wheelhouse of your mind working while Lawrence Fishburne, that scene is playing out. And like it really, yeah, it scared me. That's the best way that I can put it. Um
I call it the 4 block radius syndrome. So
mm,
many of the characters in this film, they had that neighborhood mentality, and they didn't see how, even what he was saying, how it's slowly being taken away from you,
mhm,
and you're going to be left out in the cold wondering what happened because you're not focusing on what to do, or what he's even saying to them. And it may have seemed very far removed because of what his position in that film was. Like that, it was two parents that were very intelligent, hardworking individuals who wanted more for their child, but
mhm,
it's almost said in a way, and some of these films get it wrong in a way, because it's almost said in a way where people don't want better.
mm,
It's just, how do I get it? How do I maintain it? How do I, how do I desire it?
mm,
Because if you never had it, how do I know what I'm missing?
mm,
And that's one of the things that made it hard for me to get invest in these films, or even watch those types of films now, because often we got teased for getting more out of life, and it wasn't even something that we chose. It was just somebody said, I'm going to invest in this person,
mhm,
and it was often a child, and just the idea, like, this the feeling of having to come back home to that every day.
right.
And it's like, I don't want to come back here. I want to stay
Mhm.
over here. I don't want to go back to that,
Right.
because it's almost depressing. But these films like this, I try to watch them for the content and
Mhm.
the message, but it's hard for me because the people are real people. These are
Yeah.
real people,
Mhm.
and it was extra hard watching this time. Watching Ice Cube in this, it was hard after what has happened this year with him
Mm,
politically. It was just
yeah.
hard watching it, but
Mhm.
that's the reality of it all.
Yeah.
So what
Because
we
that was a
got?
really raw performance from him. Another instance in which
Mm-hmm.
we see, you know, musicians or rappers in general crossing over into that
Uh-huh.
realm and really honestly like having the it that like having it like understanding or you know what I'm saying like just being a decent actor like you know what I
Yeah.
mean and I know that a lot of people you know from his rap persona would have just assumed that you know like he was playing it but he hit some emotional beats in that movie that were just I mean I feel like they would have been difficult for any actor
Yeah.
you know what I
He
mean
he
and,
kind of, I'm not gonna say he cheated, but I felt like he played to what he knew. He chose roles and he
mhm,
created roles based on who he knew. And I think that, like Tupac, like probably Will Smith,
mhm,
they picked those things that kind of spoke to what their existence was
uh-huh
or what they saw around them. But overall, I think this was a powerful movie. It really um, speaks to kind of where we are right now, unfortunately, but it was good. That's
mhm. Yeah, no, it was. It's definitely a classic.
hmm
Um, next up, Free State of Jones. Free State of
mm,
Jones. What do you think about this one?
um
I had like mixed feelings about it. Like,
it's
there's a
hard.
part of me that really appreciates when they try to depict people in their real light. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I'm so glad, like, one of the things that I was appreciative of this movie was that they did not try to make him out to be some like holier than thou
Uh-huh.
savior of black people, right? Like,
It's hard. It's hard. Like 12 Years a Slave.
mhm.
This one, um, I'm trying to think of some newer ones, but it's hard for me to watch this.
They are
It's
getting
hard for
harder and harder to
me.
watch.
It's
I feel like they're
harder.
being overdone at this point.
Well, I won't go that far because there's still people who need to see these. And I think the argument that we don't need another slave movie, we do because they're not in the school books. Slavery is getting it's for me it was out of all my existence, I got one day of black history and that was
Hmm.
slavery in the US
Yeah.
all throughout all those white schools I went to, predominantly
Hmm.
white schools. So I think these are necessary for other people as we come up to remind ourselves and to teach us what our history is. But I'm tired of watching films that um, put the white man on the cover and
Mm.
who the movie is about or what the movie is about is often taken off of the cover because that's going to sell. People are going to see how sexy this man is and how handsome he is and come see this movie for that reason because we're
Mm.
too dumb to want to come to a movie that depicts us in our lowest state
Well, that's
in this
marketing.
world. I hate that. I hate that. 12 Years a Slave. Remember they put the what's his name on the front of the cover, and this man was in that movie for about 5 minutes.
Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt.
Mm.
They marketed it with his face on it, larger than all the other characters, and he was in this movie for 5 minutes, and it wasn't
Yeah.
even that impactful because he ended up snitching on the slave who wanted to become free. Like it's
Oh
hard for
wait,
me
I
to
thought he
watch
was the
this.
one that took the letter up north.
He took it up north, but he did snitch on him.
Oh, okay.
He informed those people of what he wanted to do because
Mm.
he tried to get them to. I think it felt like he was trying to not necessarily tell on him, but fight his battle, but not realizing if I
Mm.
disclose that
Okay.
this is what this man wants to do, it's not going to be good for him. And what
Right,
ended
right,
up
right.
happening, they
So
sold
he's
him
just
off.
being naive.
Right, being naive and not thinking about the man and thinking about what can I do? This is what I am going to do. Not
Hmm.
realizing that selfishness got that man sold off again. Like
Hmm.
it's gotten increasingly hard for me to watch these films because they so predictable. They're almost so predictable. It's like a formula. And this is white Hollywood trying to I don't even know if it's right or wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
include us in history finally in a very one-sided way. That's all these films. They're the same. You almost don't even have to watch them. You
Mm.
almost like to understand what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
that's what I got out of it.
I appreciated the realism in the story. Like
Mm-hmm.
it opens with battles in the Civil War,
Yeah,
and um uh I appreciated the real, like, like, honestly, this was the most brutally graphic movie since, other than Django.
or what's the
And
other
then,
one about
and with
Ned
Django,
Turner?
when and see, I didn't really find that all that brutal and graphic.
It got to
Not in
that
the
point.
same way as Django. I mean, like, seeing bullets hit people and blood splatter, and that's one thing. But if you remember that opening scene in Free State of Jones, like,
Mm-hmm.
you saw like the literal devastation of like cannons, like
Mm-hmm.
cannon fire on bodies. Um, and I think that, like, I think that there is something to that effect, that like the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, these wars were
Mm-hmm.
just like any other war, where you had like that sentiment that it's always been poor people fighting a rich man's war
But the
has
Civil War was the biggest thing that set it apart was the war was about us. It was
right,
over us. All
right.
the other wars was about wealth and pride
Well, this one
and
was too,
ego,
but this one was too.
but it was less about pride and
Even about
ego.
us, even the us is the wealth, and I think that's
But
what we.
but we're more to look at it that way. We see ourselves as that less than character.
No, 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 no,
It
no.
was it was over.
I'm looking at it from a realistic perspective of like that's how they viewed it. Like, yeah, it was about us, but it wasn't about us as human beings. It was about, for the South at least, it was about us as
No,
property.
but that's their. But what you're speaking of is their perspective. Us looking at this war was about us. It wasn't about freedom. It wasn't about. I don't even think it was about wealth. It was about maintaining my wealth. It was about maintaining my day to day life and what's
Mhm,
comfort to me. It was about political pawn moving on a chessboard, like with human bodies and human lives.
mhm.
We were cattle to them,
Yeah.
and all the other wars was about something totally. This one right here was about us and the lack of respect that either side had for us. It was like a tug of war with our bodies, and neither party wanted the body. We just needed the work that came from the body, and it's just hard watching these types of
An
films.
interesting perspective. Like, yeah, but it was definitely a hard watch, like all the way
Mm-hmm.
around. Um,
I
yeah.
value them telling a more accurate story. Like each one of these gets more and more accurate because I think it's harder
Now
for them to
that
lie.
I do believe. That I do believe.
Yeah, and it's almost
And not even that it's harder for them to lie, but Hollywood, I feel like has always been left leaning and a little bit more progressive than others. But then on the flip side, they've always been cowardly in their depictions.
I
And
never saw
now,
them as I just don't see them as ally material. I don't see
no,
them
no,
as
I didn't. Well, no,
left.
I said progressive and left
Right,
leaning. That don't mean ally. And like,
right.
if we think that just because somebody is left, or progressive, that automatically makes them an ally to black people, then you just not paying attention.
It just
What
for
I'm
me
saying,
it really puts me in a space of I for them to create films like this that don't change their way of doing things.
mhm.
I can't respect it. I can't respect these films,
And what would
even
you want
if
to see? Like, what does that look like for you?
We
Them
should
changing their way of doing things.
we shouldn't still be. I mean, right now Hollywood is exploding, and it's not even Hollywood anymore because they films are less made there and made everywhere else but there.
Yeah,
But
but the studio system, like, don't get it twisted. Geography. I think is very minuscule. We think of Hollywood, we think of it as a thing, and we think of it as a
right,
geographical
well,
location.
that's what we're
And
trying
while
to
the
be told. That's what they're
geographical
trying to tell
location
us.
is changing, the thing of Hollywood is still very much intact.
It is my
Yeah.
point for saying that is more so what I want them to do. Well, I can't even say what I want them to do, but the problem is we're still at a space where we're still with all of the technology, with all of the advancement, the streaming sites making it possible for everybody to have a space to tell their stories. We're still being marginalized and
Mm-hmm.
being told there's only room for a couple. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
only room for a few. And
Mm-hmm.
that same system is then creating films like this depicting this level of truth, and everyone gets a little bit more honest, everyone gets a little bit more closer to the reality. So
Uh-huh.
you've known the reality this whole time, you just are you dosing it out to us, or
Mm-hmm.
like I don't get the reasoning
But
behind making
yeah,
these
I
films.
think I would say, yeah, they are dosing it out
For
because I
what
think
reason though? What do they get out of it? It's not an apology. It's
no,
not
it's
a
not even. I don't.
reparation.
First of all, I don't think it's about an apology or reparation. I think that um, it's a trend now. Like,
Because they
being
put
a
themselves as
like
stars in the
here's
middle
the
of it.
thing. But being even as stars, even putting themselves as stars, like being a truth teller in general right now is trendy, right? Or at least to give off the perception that you're being honest and telling the truth is trendy. And
But it doesn't. The telling the truth matters little when you keep putting yourself as the star. I'm tired of seeing the same Gone with the Wind movie done over and over in different formats.
yeah, I am
I'm
too.
tired of seeing it. I'm tired of
I am too.
seeing Gone with the Winds and all these movies depicting us as the same characters. They're giving us more roles now or more prominent positions, but they keep making themselves the hero or the star of these films.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just whether the star becomes the director, so it's not labeled as a black film,
Mm-hmm.
or the star is this gentleman that's at the on the cover, and the story isn't really about him. He
Mm-hmm.
just becomes the storyteller, or the narrator, or the
Well,
perspective that the story is being told from.
in the instance of this movie, like, it's pretty accurate to the historical log, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that guy Knight, who Matthew McConaughey plays, um, like, that is pretty close to what they've been able to dig up historically about the sequence of events that happened.
Yeah,
Um, and outside of the Nat Turner story, I don't know how many stories exist where you could make a full picture where we are like, or like someone us is the star, like,
it's not
outside of
well.
Nat
The
Turner.
star.
If you're talking about the slave movies, like, we know that Nat Turner
But
by
when
himself.
I said star, I meant so of course at that time they were in power. That's obvious.
Yeah.
But when you create a story about a specific perspective and you fail to show that perspective because you put yourself as the lead character, so you're blocking anything that will get us to ultimate truth, or to the ultimate truth rather.
Mm.
And that's just the part that I have issue with. I just still keep seeing these same white men, Matthew McConaughey, what was the other, Brad Pitt. I keep seeing these men being put in these movies, and
Mm-hmm.
it becomes their moment to stretch as actors. And our
Mm.
roles never change in these types
So
of
you're
films.
not okay. I see what you're saying. You're talking more about the depth of the characters
The depth of the character, yes.
and
But
like
also
like.
the body that's within that character, the Brad Pitt of that character, the Matthew McConaughey. How is it possible for them to build a strong legacy of a career off of telling stories in a distorted way? And they be considered historical, accurate, biopic style movies. Like, how
Mm-hmm,
do you can how? I always wonder why do many of us look at these characters, and I know a lot of us don't look at them as the great thing, but they acted the character well, and I'm able to separate the character from the man or the woman even. But
mm-hmm,
something about this isn't. It's the same movie that just keep getting made over, and they keep changing the perspective of the truth. Yet
mm-hmm,
we our roles never change, and that's just history because it never did change. We remain slaves, and we went from slaves to sharecroppers to, segregated to the new Negro. Like we evolved in that way, but these stories can keep being made from these perspectives. And the difference between these stories and a Nat Turner is because of who the storyteller was. Nat Turner, Mr. Parker, he was the storyteller in that,
mm-hmm.
the researcher and storyteller in that. And it just feels crazy to me that there's still a space for these movies to be made in this way. I value Roots. I value Queens. I value uh the Nat Turner movie. I don't value this.
Mm.
I don't, because this is a skewed truth. It will all they always humanize their wrongdoing or normalize it in a way that we sympathize with their character
Mm-hmm.
because they just didn't know better.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of my perspective on it. That's what makes it difficult for me to watch this.
Mm.
But yeah.
Is it hard for you to believe? Like I feel like I wonder sometimes like it we are raised in this like black and white truth as black
Mm-hmm.
people that white people were like that black people were slaves and white people were slave owners and
Mm-hmm.
there's that good and evil dichotomy. Is it hard for you to swallow or is it hard for you to accept that like that may not the way that we think about it, as in if you were white you were a slave owner or you were racist and you didn't care, and if you were black you were just a slave and that's what it was? Is it just difficult to accept that it was not that black and white?
It's difficult for me to realize the same issue that we have with unity now, we
Mm-hmm.
had with unity then.
Right.
And there wasn't more uprisings. There wasn't more, let's slash their throats and keep it moving.
Mm-hmm.
And go to the next plantation and do the same thing and work our way to the leadership of the country and
But
pick
we
them
kind
off
of,
one by one.
I think there was the understanding that like we was behind enemy lines, like with no, like, okay, let me draw a comparison real quick. So, uh, okay, so before the Taliban was the Taliban, right? They were another group by a different name in
Mm-hmm.
Afghanistan that was fighting I think the Soviets, maybe. Like I think it was the Soviet Union that was pressing down on them as a country or as a people, right? And the reason why they hate the United States so much is because the United States was like the country that came in and funded them and like helped them through, you know what I'm saying, and then abandoned them. Like when it was convenient
Mm-hmm.
for the United States, they like pulled out, abandoned them, right?
Right.
Um, but in these countries where, but my point, I guess, is that they were on their home base. Like, no matter what the Soviets did or what the United States government did, one of the things that why the Middle East is such a hotbed region is because they are at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's much easier to propel invaders when you're on your home turf. In the United States, and like, we haven't really seen this anywhere else except in the Bible, right? The biblical Bible is the only other story we have of a
Mm-hmm.
people completely displaced, right? The Hebrews in Egypt are completely displaced, like outside of their homeland, outside of their territory, completely displaced.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the biblical story, and then there's the real life depiction, which is us, right? Our ancestors being trapped, right, on this island,
Mm-hmm.
where they are relatively outnumbered, and they may not have been outnumbered in the South, but in the general population, they're outnumbered. And it's like, even if they were able to do what you're describing, like take the Nat Turners and keep moving, keep taking plantations, like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the end game? You know what I mean? When you are trapped and you're so far away from your homeland,
Right.
and
So it
whether or
would
not,
be impossible to plan a goal. It would
right?
be impossible. It would just be, we got to take out enough of them, whereas though we are the majority at this point. And it's just that idea of all these years we've been calling ourselves a minority. And I really don't think we have been the minority. I know, and I don't want to
Well,
open
we're
that
not a
wound up.
minority. We've been minoritized.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
And a
So,
lot of the things that Black people believe about the Black condition
mhm,
have been implanted ideas, right? They've been
like
these
fear
things that,
tactics.
yeah, fear tactics is one way of instituting, but a lot of things that we think we know because it's been fed to us. That's
Right.
absolutely.
And what is, it's just that's the way it is. You
Mhm.
know, I remember being in high school, that one day, that one class of Black history that I got, and this white man that couldn't have been more than 25, 26 at the time, teaching me that slavery wasn't as bad as we thought it was. Why would I beat my slave? That's like beating my tractor or my, you
Mhm.
know, my farm equipment.
Mm.
Why would I damage them in that way? And I'm sitting in a room full of me and maybe 20 some other white or non-black individuals and one other black guy who I just looked at the whole time this man was talking.
Mhm.
And he was sucking it in like the rest of those students were. And I had never been so not afraid of getting an ass whipping from my mother than I was that day, because I just could not. It was something in my mind that said, "This is, it's so wrong that it is wrong." Like, and I could see the good old boy in that man that was teaching me that day. So that's what I see when I see these films. It's not,
Mhm.
I don't even think it's a direct evil. It's a birthright that they receive to be that ignorant and then pass it
But it, no,
on.
no, no. Call it what it is. It is direct. It is evil.
Well, it's,
It is
well,
evil,
I
and like.
only see it that way because I've seen the interaction between a young person
Mhm.
of that's not black. I've seen the interaction, and I don't believe that they naturally feel that way. I think it's a learned trait, and it's something that is then accepted as they move on.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That, and I'm not saying that every single individual is evil. I'm just saying
Right.
that
They
the
become evil.
right, the that idea, and we can talk about this as we segue into our next
Right.
one, which is our documentary 13th, right?
Mm.
Um And 13th is really this like really, really well thought out, really well done documentary that just basically opens your eyes to the amendment that freed the slaves, the 13th Amendment, right? Which continues on to say that, no person can be a slave unless they've been duly convicted by a court of law, in which case they can, in fact, be enslaved again.
Right.
And
It
just
opens it up to a whole different perspective.
so
And
that is the evil,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That is then perpetuated and continued. I mean, like, the ramifications of 13th, like,
Right.
leads all the way up to the prison industrial complex of today.
Yeah.
Right? The groundwork is laid in the 13th Amendment. And
It's how
so if you
we
look at that
manage
as the evil
behavior.
act, right? The evil senator, the evil representative who said, "Hey, let's change it from just abolishing slavery to abolishing slavery unless you've been
It
convicted
was
as a
because the 13th Amendment was a political move. It wasn't about the Civil War. That wasn't about. It wasn't about. I know I just said it was about us, but from their perspective, it was
criminal."
just a political move. It was a push to be bipartisan. That's what it summed up to
I
be.
don't know if I'd agree. I don't know if I agree with that.
It was he at that point he was trying to save the country. There were people who were talking about, as
I
they are
mean,
today, removing themselves from the country
I think
as a
that
state. Like,
I
and he
mean,
was trying to save the country from that, and
well, that,
decided to let's
but
fight each other to
I
get
think
over it.
two things can be true at the same time. And the funny thing is, like, and that goes back to, like, I think a lot of people are either confused about or don't really know the history of, like, the Republican Party and how it came about. Because if you believe that the only reason that we had the Civil War, the only reason that Lincoln freed the slaves was for political reasons and just about, bringing some type of balance to the country, well, they already had a party for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a little bit more complicated than I think people really want to give credit to, because I think that people have become so stoic in their ideas and their beliefs that they don't want to take in any information. But the truth of the matter is that like 10 years before Abraham Lincoln roughly was elected president, there were two parties in America. There were the Democrats, which was the pro-slavery Southern Party, and there were the Whigs, were the Northern Party, which represented most of the North. But the Whigs were very much like, all right, look, we understand. The Whigs were very much of the ilk of, like, look, we ain't trying to lose all our power to y'all, but we understand that slavery is your thing,
Your
and
move.
we don't want to, like, we're not trying to push against slavery too much. We just want to make sure that y'all don't take too much power so that we don't have no say, right? And
Right.
there began this uprising of people who were literally like, no, slavery is wrong. Why are we compromising with them? This shit needs to end. And though that group of people eventually became the Republican Party. So when people say that, like, about Lincoln, I'm like,
Oh shit.
doesn't really track. Like, it sounds good in the narrative of, like, Black people have always been on the short end of the stick and this is why, but it doesn't really track when you really look at what really happened, right? Like, there was no reason for you to become a Republican in that time unless you vehemently opposed slavery, right? Like, you thought that it
Yeah,
was
but
moral wrong.
these same Whigs, if you will, went home to slave labor. Like They
No. The wigs. I know. That's what I'm saying. The wigs were the that party was the
hypocrite.
party that was like they were. How do you say? They were resistant to slavery, but it was all economical. They didn't value or they didn't see black people as human beings, or they just
Right.
didn't want to lose their power because in the South everybody had slaves, or like the majority of the population, or however much
I
had
mean, the
slaves.
northern people just put them in better clothing. That's what it looked like
I
to
mean,
me.
I that's an argument that can be made. I'm just saying that
Lincoln had
the
slaves before he became president. Like,
that's not confirmed. That is a rumor and one that is not true in most cases. Like like we never gonna know what's absolutely true and what's not. But I mean, they keep pretty good historical records, and this whole like Lincoln was a slave owner shit is not true. Like there's no
why?
legal
But
documentation whatsoever. It's just people literally will push that story like he was white in America. He
no, I
must have
mean,
owned
but if
slaves.
you go to any of the historical museums that's set up for him, even to where his house, the museum that is his house, his actual house before he became president, there were slave quarters there. So those things didn't not exist. He didn't have a whole stable of slaves. They were more like uh, house servants, but they were slaves. They weren't getting paid for their job.
Okay. I'm look, yo, like I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna go back and forth about this. I'm gonna just say this. Lincoln did not own slaves. Never in his life did he own slaves. And
So they
for
belong to
you
his
or
wife
anyone
then?
for you or anyone listening, I would challenge you to then like I ain't gonna say do your research. Don't go watch no YouTube videos.
I
Like
didn't watch
Google
any
it.
YouTube.
Like
I've been to
you
many of
can
these
Google it and
museums
you can go
that were
to
not made by us.
okay. I'm just telling
So
you that Abraham Lincoln did not own slaves.
I don't know where that logic or that
I don't know
information
where your
came
logic
from.
is because I've been in my fair share number of museums, and I've never been in a museum where it's like, yeah, this was
I went
Abraham
to the
Lincoln's
home
slave.
that's been made, his former home that was made into a museum, and
Mhm.
there were slave quarters there.
Were they, or was Lincoln just poor? He grew up dirt poor in Kentucky.
Yeah,
So if
he
you're
was
dirt,
poor,
hold
but
on,
his wife
time
wasn't
out. If
poor.
you're dirt poor in Kentucky,
Yeah, but his wife
who
wasn't poor.
his wife wasn't poor, so his wife's family or his wife may have owned some slaves. Does that mean he owned slaves?
I mean, once he married her,
Again,
he
that's
took
what I'm
on her
talking about. Yeah,
property
like
as
I'm talking.
well. So did he say no? We're no longer going to have slaves now
I
that
don't
we're
know. You
married.
tell me. Because if he
That
moved,
didn't
if you saying that he
happen.
moved into his wife's house,
No,
and
once they got married and he became a lawyer, they did have a little bit more
mhm.
because he married her. He married into wealth. So it
So
may have been
her
the thing of he
her
may
family
not have
owned
grown
slaves.
up right. I'm not saying as a child
No, yo, you're not
in
gonna
their
put that on
home.
me, yo. Like if my wife
I
was a
didn't.
drug addict before I met her, and like I married her, unless she was a drug addict and I started using drugs, you're not gonna throw drug addiction on me.
Well, that doesn't make sense. But if you own slaves
Makes
and
sense.
you married
Okay,
someone who owned
if I
slaves,
married
that
someone that
means
owns
you a
slaves,
slave
doesn't mean
owner
that
as
I own
well.
this.
That's
Okay. And
exactly
that's
what
what
that
I'm talking
means.
about. That's the narrative of I just want to
If
believe that
you get
every black
married,
person was a
so
slave and every white person owned slaves.
I didn't say every
Like
white person owns
you
slaves.
talking
I said
semantics now. If
no,
my wife
I'm not.
owns,
Please don't put those types of words in my mouth. I
you are
said
though. That's
no, I
semantics.
didn't.
Very
You're
definition.
speaking of Lincoln before he got married and as he was a child. I'm speaking of the president of the United States, the lawyer.
He
I'm
didn't
speaking
own
of that.
slaves.
If he was married to a woman who owned slaves, then that means he was the owner of those slaves
Right.
because they
Okay.
were in his home.
Right. You gotta bend the narrative to
It's
make
not
him
a
a slave owner.
narrative. It's not a narrative because at that
opens the
time,
door for you to discredit.
he inherited the wealth from his wife's family. When they got married, he became the owner of whatever property they gave to them or whatever money he got from a dowry from her. So that came along with slaves. Like that's not a made up part of history. That's actual history.
Okay.
Like,
I mean, there's a list
whether
of presidents who own slaves, and he's not on it.
So
I'm just saying, yo, like I'm just saying, like
but
that's not. This
we can't
thing is
just
my
make up
opinion.
history to fit a narrative,
I'm not
though.
making up history. Like I said, like just because you marry someone,
you would have been his slave if you were.
If I was his wife's slave,
wife.
if I was his wife's slave,
that automatically,
then I would have been automatically
history at that time, right?
Okay,
they were married, they were living in. So did she only have her own? The slave only?
I don't know. I've never done no research into Mary Todd. I've never done any research into Mary Todd.
You should. He married into a wealthy family.
That's fine. Like people do that all the time.
So he assumed his wife's wealth. Like he didn't.
Exactly,
no, we're not.
Yo.
And you can keep that over
that's
there.
A stretch. Like you stretching stuff.
It's not stretching.
To fit your theory. You stretching it to fit your theory. It's like that's because he did not marry her because she owned slaves. It is.
No, I didn't say that's
Unless
why he married her.
Purchased some slaves, yo. He didn't own slaves.
He owned them. Like at that time, women were not able to own land or property.
Well, who get the slaves from then, yo? So then she didn't own slaves if she wasn't allowed to own property.
But that
came from his family. Exactly.
They owned the slaves. Like that
married, when they got married, they went on their own separate way. That's what.
But she brought with her the wealth from her family. I'm very sure about that. I study history just like you studied history. So
I'm coming up with two different facts.
I'm not sitting out here. Well, I'm going by what I read and I researched.
He didn't own slaves.
If I know nothing else, I know history. So that's a big part of something that I've studied my whole life. So I'm not going to sit up here and act like he didn't own any slaves, and we're going to be technical about it, whether or not she brought the slaves with her.
You're saying that her family owned slaves. He married her. They went on their separate way, and then they owned slaves together.
Yes.
I think that would show up in a historical record, Nate.
What historical record are you looking at?
The historical record of like who owned slaves. Like it wasn't like you just picked up a slave wherever you found them. Like it's historical records of like slave ownership. And Abraham Lincoln is not on it.
Yeah, but often slaves weren't even counted as human beings. It was property. So often it wasn't even
You can't own a house without some legal documentation or paperwork. And you can't own a slave without one either. It wasn't no back alley.
They wasn't listed as names. They were often listed as numbers. They were not listed as unless they were free. They were not counted as a human being.
That was for the Electoral College and political purposes.
No, it was not. Before the Electoral College even got to us,
slave owners, you had to have a record.
And they were listed as property.
And
right,
we
and
know
they were
now,
listed as numbers.
We know now what those numbers are.
That's why most of us hit a brick wall when we're researching history.
We hit a brick wall because they didn't use names. But historically,
that's what I just said. That was my whole point. You telling me no, but then you use my same point.
We know that a number indicates a slave. We know what it looks like now when they own slaves.
But because you haven't researched that on him. That doesn't mean that it didn't exist. And you're telling me, but it doesn't. But you're saying that, and you haven't done any research. You're saying that because you created a narrative based on something else you've learned.
I'm telling you that you based the narrative.
But I need proof. Then, if you're telling me I'm wrong, I need proof. I need proof that I'm wrong.
I'm saying he don't own slaves. If he owns slaves, the onus is on you.
But you said it without a shadow of a doubt that he didn't own them.
He didn't.
Where did you get this information from?
Where did you get yours?
I did research. I read books. I
You
went to
sound
his
like a YouTube
actual.
scholar
I
right
went
now.
to
Get
his
out of here. I
actual
did research.
home
Post the research
museum.
in the page,
I
then,
went to
Nate.
his actual
Post the research
museum.
in the page, then. Post the
It's.
post
I
the
don't
research.
have a problem with that.
All right,
I don't
do
have an
that.
issue with that
Do
at
that.
all. I'll tell you where his home was. You can go to his home and they've done the research already.
Hold on for a minute.
It's factual information. So I'm gonna move on to the next one. Um,
I'm sorry, I had to reconnect my earphones. Um, Out of Darkness.
so I
And
think the crazy thing that happened was I think you looked up the wrong one, or
so
maybe I didn't make
you had
it.
you had a what's the name? The poster.
Uh-huh. So
Yeah,
the outer darkness that I was referring to.
I
So we
definitely
can both talk to the one that we
yeah.
both,
Let's
because
talk.
you looked up a documentary that I'm familiar with that one as well. But the
Okay.
outer darkness that I was referring to was a movie starring Diana Ross that kind of put her on a different scale outside of her being an actress. It was one of the first movies that she did that was outside of the realm of her just playing, say, Billie Holiday. It was definitely way before Mahogany or a couple of the other films that she's done. But this film, it kind of spotlighted mental disorder.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and she played a schizophrenic woman who had multiple personalities, and
Mm.
something had happened to her in childhood, and at some point she broke. And she began to hear voices. She also had a child in this movie that she was separated from. She was put into a facility for a number of years and went through some very extensive like treatment, and eventually in the movie she kind of balances herself back out and she comes back out. But it also showed, even towards the end of the film, that people who have suffered from this still never fully recover from going through something like this. And it really, for me, I love Diana Ross as a singer, but it
Mm-hmm.
really put her in a different space for me as an actor. And we talked a little bit about musicals in another episode.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one thing to know how to sing, but when you can really deeply engulf yourself into a character, it speaks volumes about your ability and your talent. And she has never gotten real acclaim for any of her roles because she was Diana Ross.
Mm.
So if you see this film, it is it's a scary depiction because we're used to Diana Ross being this glamorous person.
Mm-hmm.
We're not used to her being like a down home individual or the girl next door or even one of our family members. We put her on such a high pedestal, creative wise, that her being able to sink her teeth into something like this, um, it was scary watching it
Mm.
because I have family members who suffer from schizophrenia and bipolar.
Yeah.
Uh, and it is a scary thing to walk into a room and catch them having a conversation on their own, and they don't even recognize or aren't aware that you're in the space with them.
Mm.
It's a scary thing, and it's one thing to, and don't get me wrong, it's nothing wrong with talking to yourself, but to the level where they're actually holding a conversation,
Yeah.
and it went beyond just the surface of it. It went way beyond the surface of mental disorder because you see her journey from the moment she broke
Mm-hmm.
mentally to the time to the point of her recovering and still dealing with it, like
Do
her
you
not
know
being
who
go
wrote
ahead.
that?
Yeah, so
Because I feel like that's a film that it can only be that type of subject matter can only be written by somebody who has gone through it or has a
I
very
think it
very
was I think
deep,
the
close
person
connection.
studied psychology, if I'm not mistaken. But hold on, I'm trying to go to my notes because I thought this was going to be later. Hour of Darkness. So this film, where am I? This is crazy. No, it doesn't want to open up. So while I'm looking this information up, can you tell us about
So I
the
watched.
documentary
So
that you
so so
wrote?
the funny thing was like we were listing these movies, and I had the two documentaries of what I thought were documentaries. So
Yeah.
the Out of Darkness that I watched is a 3 hour documentary about the African contribution to the world. Right.
Uh-huh.
It like so
Yeah.
if any of you who listening and Nate, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the 1619 project, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the 1619 project was this like massive project by the New York Times where they told the story of America. Instead of starting with the Revolutionary War, they kind of flipped it on its head and started the story at 1619, which was a specific date. That was the year that the first 20 African slaves arrived in Jamestown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of reframed the entire U.S. history based around, instead of saying that the ideals, what made America was its ideals around, all the stuff we saw in Hamilton, right? Like
Right.
I'm young and scrappy, and like I'm not gonna I'm not gonna miss my shot and all that type of stuff, right? You thought about the historical American perspective in the vein of this country is what it is today because of slavery and racism, right? And that's all they were saying, and people got really up in arms about it. But long before the 1619 project, because this came out in I think 2014.
I think it was
Is
earlier than that.
and it might be earlier than that. It could be earlier than that. Give me 1 second. I thought it was 2014. It was screened. It could have come out. I'm not. It's a little ambiguity around when it was done, but in the vein of the 1619 project, before the 1619 project, this kind of goes back pre-slavery and talks about like the African influence on the world, right? And then specifically how these contributions were minimized, how they were like buried, in some cases just outright denied. As this anti-black racist kind of ideology popped up in different parts of the globe, and a lot of it they trace to the treatment of Africans in the Americas, right? So, and that's not to say
that
bad,
unfair,
which is
because it
not
didn't start there.
Right. It didn't start there because the truth is, like, some horrible things happened to black people before the slave trade, but
a lot of that is
more.
if you study theater history, you'll realize a lot of things that we hold true. Religion, our spiritual like celebrations, like birthdays and stuff like that, deaths, births, are contributed to Africa. It's all sent back to Africa. And then when you study theater history, you'll realize the Romans and the Greeks went in and this pillaged and stole and adapted and created for themselves. And then when you ask where did theater originate from, you start hearing more Greek and Roman perspectives versus African. But they went in and stole ways of life, ways of worship, and theater.
And the funny thing is, like, I don't like from what this documentary is saying. And like, I don't even think it was the Greeks and the Romans.
Well, that was just one
Because
example. I was just giving you
but
one
that is an
example.
example of where eventually, like, I don't think it was the Greeks and Romans that did it, but eventually even that history was reached back into and erased from us, like our contribution to Socrates and the idea of democracy, and the idea of individual freedoms and
religion itself.
and there's just so actually, according to what I was watching, this is dated 2016, not 2014.
It may have just been like release dates,
but
like if something premiered or released.
Those things where it was independently put together, independently done. So this thing could have existed as early as like 2007, and it just never made it to a film festival or.
Well, the dates are probably multiple dates that you see. It's probably because it was probably put into film festivals, so you would see dates of it premiering. Because often when you go to film festivals, you can't have it other places.
Says the date on it is 2016, and it also says that it was the official selection of the Pan-African Film Festival in 2016.
So that's probably why you see it that date, because one says 215, the other one says 214, and that's just probably because when you're shopping and around two festivals, you can't have had it. Right, you can't have it in other locations. So that's probably why you see the difference in dates.
Yep. So, but it's got a lot of our Pan-African scholars. Umar Johnson is in it, and I think
that's where I first learned about it.
I think it's before we started kind of like questioning his motives a little bit. But Claude Anderson, who is a Pan-African writer and historian, Sabir Bey.
Claude Anderson.
Yeah, that's what I said, didn't?
No, I was reading Dr. Claude.
Yeah, Dr. Claude Anderson. But it just really draws this connection of like a lot of things that I don't even think that we think about on an everyday basis, but there is a lot to the Western culture in general. Like they talked about the Moors and how they brought the concept of soap to Europe, right? And it's really funny.
Most things that we can think of, really even invention-wise, can all stem from Africa.
And it's really funny when you think about. It's really funny to me when you think about how this is not part of the history, and this is where I feel like racism is at its most insidious, right? Because prior to the Moors coming to Europe, coming to Spain, right, they came on the back end of the Dark Ages, right? The Black Plague, you know what I'm saying? And they brought soap. You know what I'm saying? And like, if you ever read up on like what the Black Plague was, it was like when you read between the lines, it's just like, oh, these motherfuckers just dirty.
Dirty ass people.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
well, it wasn't in there. They thought
culture. It wasn't in their culture,
right? They thought disease lived in the water. The only time that someone would get clean is when someone was being ordained or a bride. So the idea of the bride holding the flower was because everything else stunk around her, and that was her one day to be clean, and that was her like protecting her nostrils from the stench. Like the idea of bathrooms inside the home, plumbing, all of those things, you can all relate that back to. But it's all been translated into Latin and Roman and Greek information. So the idea that
they hold languages that were brought to them, like Latin in particular. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like Latin in particular, which you ever wonder why all of our legal terms are in Latin, right? Most of what they call the Romantic languages, which I think English is part of, stem from Latin. And yet that's the dead language. That's the language that they've decided to do away with, that they really don't teach
Well, the culture of the
much
people
anymore.
who spoke Latin were wiped out. So who else was going to be left to
But
speak
but
it?
but here's the thing though, like when you got all these different languages that are
Mhm.
derivatives of Latin, why
Yeah.
wouldn't you teach it? Why wouldn't you? You know what I'm saying? If it was just a
Because it was a social thing. So only the higher kings and queens and their court were able to learn it. So that kept it out of the mouths of the everyday people, other than people who scribed books, who hand copied books.
right.
Those
So
were the people who
in
then
this
became the teachers.
documentary, it would be proposed that the reason why they got rid of it is because they just didn't want you to know what they knew.
Right.
You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like,
Well, it was to keep you subservient,
mhm,
but I think by the time it got to America, it was at a space where I don't want you to learn the language, because if you learn it, you'll overtake us. But I need you to understand it. So eventually we would learn to, and that's where dialects came from, because then we began to understand it and be able to communicate with them, but we were not able to officially learn it. And it was
it
that
could have been something that we
documentary.
brought. Like, it could have been something that we brought with us.
What, the
Like,
language, you mean?
yeah, when you watch this documentary, yo, you realize that
Well, that's
the
right. Like if you go
lies.
down to North Carolina, South Carolina, and
Uh,
off of those two states are the island, where it said a lot of Geechee people live. That's
yeah.
where the idea that's our closest connection to where we came from. And that's still a combination of a French, and I think it's French and Spanish and one
Hmm.
other language. But
Yeah, because it
it,
was
it's a
French,
it's a
Spanish, and
reason we're here.
Portuguese who
Yeah.
really
Hmm.
populated that area.
Right.
Um,
Right. And that's why you'll
so,
find blacks in all of those places.
mhm,
But I think that documentary, well, not the documentary, but many of the people who derived their thesis or their
mhm,
mindsets based off of that film, or that information that was gathered. I think the problem is, like a Dr. Umar, the problem then becomes what he does with that information, and
right.
how it's then, because it's still not being taught. We're being beat over our heads with it. So many people don't want to take the information, because it almost feels like another form of Christianity. So we're
Mhm,
being beat with this knowledge of self that we're not familiar with. The idea that they look at Egyptians as not African, yet because there's so much mixture that went into Egypt, so many different cultures that uh kind of whitewashed what Egypt was. But
mhm.
it's definitely Africa. It's definitely, a strong African presence there. But it's been so many Middle Eastern and other countries that kind of took over that one space and left the rest of Africa, because they took everything they could. But it was a good. I think
Well, I think
it
they
was a
just,
minute.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. I was going to say, did they just, they cherry pick? I was
Yeah.
going to say they cherry pick, like, and that's why I think that it's crazy when you think about, like, I started to realize that, like, you think about people changing history, and you think to yourself, oh no, that can't possibly happen. That would take
But was it
like
even a change?
such
It
a
was just
large.
I'm just going to destroy your history.
Well, that's, I mean, a
It wasn't even
disruption is a
something that they put
change.
in the place. It wasn't even. So we're going to teach them that this happened, not tell them about this. It was just a total devastation of people's history. Like when you take somebody from their land and bring them somewhere else,
Hmm.
and you mix them up. They purposely mixed us
But
up
yo,
so
like,
we
we're
wasn't
talking,
with.
but you realize that we're talking about pre-slavery.
Right.
Like this is not this documentary talks about
Yeah.
slavery in America, but
Yeah.
it specifically is the story. It's like it's more than that. It's like
Right.
it's the story of how our contributions to the world today
Hmm.
have been erased. So it's not just
But there's
about
not. But the crazy thing is there's knowledge that automatically connects all of those things back to its origin.
Mhm,
But for some reason, it's not information that's widespread. Yet the information is right there. It's right there.
mhm,
It's just we aren't connected to it. We just not. And I my introduction to that um was theater history. So I began to just study just the history of theater. And what frustrated me was everything about their culture, it was something that they got from some part of Africa. So the idea, the ritual of a funeral, that stems from Africa. The ritual of you know being birthed or being married or being ordained to some spiritual leadership. All of those things stemmed from Africa. So the idea of what theater is today, where we learned from Greeks and Romans, where it started with the chorus and it started with a religious practice, and that's where
mhm,
theater came from, what you call it, the dramatics of a religious practice. All of those things stemmed from Africa, and they just took it back and made it, added their culture to it, and it became something totally different. So if you
mhm,
follow history through the eyes of theater, it takes you back to the origin of who we are, and that is definitely in Africa.
mhm,
Even if you start dealing with like the zodiacs and like Neptune versus Zeus versus the Orishas, all of that is connected. Like it's the same thing. They just start calling it something else. So I forgot, Neptune is this character and Zeus is this character, and you can relate all of them back to what we call Orishas. Like all of them, and even in that deity and those god and lower gods, that's still something. If you go throughout Africa, you'll still see different versions of that. So it came from here and then they evolved it. it's it makes me, I remember that first theater history class that I took, it just made me feel lost. Like, am I supposed to have a connection to those things, or is that why many of us have this connection to the natural world or our culture and such? But it just feels like, where do we begin to put the pieces back together?
mhm.
So watching that film, what did you take away from it?
I I take away what I take away from all these films is that like we should leave.
Leave
Yeah, we should
and go
leave.
where?
I don't know anywhere in Africa. Like I don't know anywhere in Africa. I can't think of any place. Well, let me speak on what I know. Uh, I know that anywhere on the eastern coast of Africa,
Mm-hmm.
Tanzania, Kenya, the
Mm-hmm.
island of Madagascar, that region, we would be welcomed. I feel like we would be welcomed anywhere in Africa.
But I think before we go there, if we are going to make this big exodus, I think there's still a level of collective consciousness that we have to agree to,
Yeah,
because
let's leave.
ultimately we're going to,
That's the
but
collective consciousness. Let's go.
yeah, yeah, but we run the risk of turning there into here
How?
with certain habits and mindsets. So we have to get before.
Nah, because I mean we'd be outnumbered and we like you know what I'm saying like I don't buy I don't know if
Mm,
I buy that argument just because like we'd be outnumbered like you
we
know what
have
I'm
to get
saying.
ourselves here first, because we're not on the same page here. Going over that, first of all,
Well, we're not
everybody
on the
not gonna
same,
go.
but yo, like, here's the thing, yo, like, we not on the same page here because there's a considerable amount of resources and funding and programs and whatnot to keep us disjointed. It's kind of like the American way to keep, in order for those who want and who covet power to be in power and stay in power, they
Right.
kind of have to disinform and like, they got nothing but time and money to like sow divisions between the people, and we seeing that on a mass scale, not just amongst Black people, but on a
But
countrywide
we're
scale.
allowing it though. We
We
are allowing it.
do, and there's an argument to that, but I think there's a point where the change is really like, yo, you just gotta leave. You
But
know what I'm
at some
saying?
point,
Like,
we still have to take responsibility that all this time that we've been in this country, we've allowed a system to separate us and to water
and I don't
down
think, and
our connection to each other
I don't
and to
think that
divide us.
I don't think that we should accept any ounce of responsibility for an evil ass system that is
I didn't, but still, every
what
finger you
else?
point, you still have three at you. What is your responsibility in that? So now we've been able to research all this history, and we know the many truths that lie beneath that history, and yet we still treat each other the way we do. They're not going to deal with a lot of our mindsets over there. They're not going to do that. And a lot of us are going to be
Well,
hurt and crushed by that.
I think that's a premature assumption.
Mm. I
Like
mm.
Africans, like, hold on. Africans have infighting, like they understand infighting.
Yeah,
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not something that's uncommon in any culture.
I'm not saying it's
Like,
impossible. I just feel like
I
we
think that
have to
it's
get it
easy for
together.
us to feel like, what's happening here is something that's normal. I don't think what
No,
happens
I don't.
here
I
is
don't think that.
normal
I've
at
never
all.
thought it was normal, and that's been my struggle as an individual because I never have felt comfortable in these situations, in these spaces, and I've
Mhm.
lived several different places, and I just did. You won't find that comfort. Am I saying that we're gonna go to Africa and we're gonna magically feel comfortable? I don't think that that's gonna happen.
No,
But
I don't think that's gonna happen either. And if my cavalier way of saying we should leave is indicative of, or if it's giving the impression that I think that like that's the simple solution, I don't think I don't think there's a simple solution, and I don't think that it would be a simple undertaking. I
mm-mm.
do think that we simply need to get the hell out of here.
But I think
I do think that
and I don't
I do
dispute
think
that.
that
But
there's some
what's the
simplicity
preparation
to that.
that go?
I
What
don't
level of
know.
preparation do we have to
I mean,
have?
the only level of preparation I feel like people really need is to just pack their stuff and go. I really do believe that, because I don't,
Well,
and
you can say that as
I
a
felt like this
family
for a
unit,
long
but as
time.
a
I feel
country
like,
of us, is
yeah,
that
I
feasible?
know.
Is that
I listen. I think anything that you can. I think that anything that you can imagine is feasible. I think it's absolutely feasible. I think that it's a scary proposition. It's a
mhm.
proposition that comes with a lot of
But you're saying it because you've experienced that space before.
yeah.
That's what makes you comfortable with that.
You might be right. You might be right.
So and that's why I'm saying we have to be on the same page because
Well,
I've
all of us can't
traveled there before,
experience
but
is
in
all
terms
of
of
us.
living there, that's a
Mm,
different situation. So because you've lived in that space, it makes you more comfortable about making the choice and actually being
that
in
might be
one.
100% true.
But you
You
can't
might.
you can't bring people in on your preparation level
You're right.
because it may be different for this
You're
person
right.
versus the person to your left or to your right. But I just think collectively there's a lot of things that we, and it's not only thing, it's a lot. It's just certain things that we have to learn how to do as one. Like we may not agree on certain perspectives. We may not understand certain value systems. We may not have, similar thought processes, but at some point there's still a common thread amongst us. And most of us are trying hard to divide ourselves and separate ourselves. That doesn't work in that country. And
Mhm.
I'm not saying they're perfect over there, but for the most part, we can see how they relate to us once they come here. It's almost like it's just amazement of the thought process we have. So I think this documentary is worth coming back to, and just I think creating some bullet points or like a lesson plan within it, because it's I don't want to throw away. And when you were describing what you was, I was like, what is this movie only like an hour and some change? Like was he watching? But when I realized when you said it yesterday,
Mhm.
I realized, oh yeah, okay, you watched a documentary. You didn't watch a movie. But
Mm.
both of the crazy enough, both of these
All
out
right,
of
important.
darkness are very significant to, like you said, important in the significance of where we are right now. Because mental disorder is normalized here, but it's normalized in a way where people feel more comfortable living in it and not moving past it or doing the things that's necessary for you to get past it. And in this movie, and the writer, it was actually a white woman. Her name was Barbara Turner, and she's had some experience in psychology, but outside of that, she's just a actress herself. She's a writer, and she's a producer. So it may have been an experience. It doesn't really speak to what her level of experience is, but I'm sure she had some type of involvement in psychology or
Mhm.
um, probably mental disorder, either with herself or with her family. And I want to say I I read a documentary on her before. I saw a documentary on her before, but it's a it was scary how on point Diana Ross was in this. So
Mm.
I've learned to value her more as an actress than I do as a singer, because she has two daughters. Well, I think her son is acting as well, but two of her daughters are actresses.
Mm.
So, it wouldn't be outrageous for her to be an actress herself. But
Yeah.
it's it's something that, at some point watch, because it really deals with mental disorder from her perspective, like how she felt going through it. Like we
So this is
hear the
another one I'm gonna have
voices.
to find on YouTube, huh?
Uh where do I have um Out of Darkness? I think it may be on Amazon. I know they have it on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to say I thought it was on Amazon as well. I've watched this movie several times, and because
Gotcha.
it just impressed me
It's that
as
good.
to, right,
Okay.
because when you're portraying, especially mental illness or a disability in somebody, is always a fine line of mimicking someone and embodying it. And
Yeah.
she really, at even at that level of her career, because she probably was like in her 30s in this movie. So watching her kind of engulf herself with that, I'm but if I ever got a chance to interview her, that movie would be the one that I talk
Mm-hmm.
about the most, because it was scary how
Mm-hmm.
just close it
Okay.
was.
I'm gonna check that out.
Um,
Next up, we got a Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
yeah. And Oprah is another one of those surprise actresses.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess pain and suffering will put you in a place of,
Uh-huh.
it makes for good actors.
Yep.
So Henrietta Lacks, was the woman who Oprah is playing is one of her children. And in this movie, Henrietta Lacks, at a young age, uh, suffers from um, suffers from cancer. And at
Mm-hmm.
the time, they didn't really know how to treat it, and they didn't know really what it was. And because cancer has been something that people have been fighting for at least 100 years now, almost
Yeah.
100 years. So it wasn't something that was normalized um, for Henrietta Lacks. What ended up happening was they discovered a certain gene formation in her when
Mm-hmm.
they took her in to treat her for cancer. And one of the things that they did was they just harvested her cells, and trying to help her, they harvested and realized a certain mutation that is very rare in her cell formation. So
Mm-hmm.
they begin to multiply this cell. Henrietta Lacks, along with probably dozens of other people who have gone through the John Hopkins system, probably lent themselves to this same thing happening.
Mm-hmm.
Henrietta Lacks's cells is responsible for the cure as well as the medication for many different diseases and ailments that we know of today.
Okay.
They were able to trace that one woman back to that moment when they harvested her cells and how they sold her cells. So the
Mm.
multiplied cells, they begin to sell them to institutions, hospitals, uh, scientific laboratories around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they never informed her, they never got her permission. Because this happened to her, it is now law that they get your permission before they do any type of research on you, anything inside of you or part of you, whatever. They have to get your written permission in order to do that now.
I feel like that's whack.
In terms of what?
I feel like the law should have been that if you take anything from me and you profit off of it, you automatically obligated to
But
pay
this
me
is
a certain
beyond
percentage.
profit. We're talking about HIV medication. We're talking
Yeah.
about other cancer
Oh no,
medications.
no, it is
We're
no
talking
beyond profit. That's all profit.
probably right now with the coronavirus. It's still probably the
Hmm.
descendants of her cells.
And she should have been in, and her family should have been set for life off of that. That's
They've
the law that I would have advocated
the
for.
most that they've ever gotten was there's a
Not enough.
college fund for all of the descendants of that family, the directed descendants of her, in order to go to college. So it was a fund for them to be able to go to John Hopkins or to a neighboring school within the city for free.
Hmm.
So this foundation has been set up, and even in a movie, like the discussion behind the movie, the reporter who is kind of the narrator alongside Oprah throughout this, she spoke about that's the only thing, and it wasn't necessarily that the children of Henrietta Lacks wanted financial gain, but when they realized that parts of their mother was sold for years. And mind you, the character Oprah that you see is a grown woman in her 50s, I believe. So it took her all this time to realize that this has happened. And they had did stories before, but they didn't know to the extent because they
Mm.
just said their mother, the information just came out that their mother was tested and researched. They used her body for research, but they didn't
Wow.
really tell that they sold her cells. They duplicated her cells and sold them around the world, and
Wow.
Lord knows how many other schools and how much money John Hopkins made off of the research and the selling of those cells to other people who
Wow.
then created cures and medications and processes to getting things done, stem research. So all of the research and all of the mutations in the cell, they did good, but they never told her family. and she ended up dying, probably because they was too focused on this mutation than they was on helping her. But
Wow.
it was a really good movie. It's based in Baltimore. She lived here in Baltimore. Her
Stay away
family
from
still,
Brown. Stay away from Johns Hopkins, y'all.
yep. And that's and many people don't understand, especially here in Baltimore, that relationship that many of us have with John Hopkins. You know, John
Mm.
Hopkins is one of those hospitals where you can catch a subway underneath John Hopkins and just get to anywhere else in the hospital. And they have security checkpoints, but it's really not that
Mm-hmm.
safe.
Intricate.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
So it was a really powerful movie. It's hard watching these movies
Hmm.
because like the one you just spoke of, the documentary, it's just hard to face the treatment that we've had.
So our next work is Hollywood, which is a
Mm,
Netflix original. Currently streaming first season on Netflix, and I wasn't ready. That's all I could say.
you wasn't ready.
I wasn't ready
But did
for.
you get like the description I gave you before?
Yeah, yeah. Now I get
Yeah.
that. I'm like on a season. I mean, episode 3.
Hmm.
Mm.
It gets a little
And
wild.
I can tell because it got wild in the first season and the first episode, and it's pretty much gotten wild every episode. So,
Right.
one of the things that I really liked about Hollywood, um, and although I haven't seen the whole thing, I was able to pick up on that theme like within the first 3 episodes. Was
Hmm.
that it was really about? It really seems to be about these long shots or have nots, like who are really gonna like help and support each other. So if you've
Hmm.
ever seen the opening, like the opening montage for the show,
Hmm.
it I thought it was incredibly powerful, like them climbing the Hollywood sign
Hmm.
together and like, but in a way that it's like, I'm not trying to beat you, like I want to see everybody get up. And it
Hmm.
really sets the tone for the whole show. So I'm looking forward to seeing more. That first episode was wild, son. My man, straight
Yeah.
gigolo, and
Mhm.
then they
So
got
that
extra.
so that gas station is real. That was
Uh
a
huh.
real that. So
Oh,
so
and what
this
happened to Annie Mae? What was her name? The Asian actress, Anne Mae
yeah.
Wong. Mm.
Right. So many of the characters that are being depicted, their name changes a little bit, or they
Mm-hmm.
some of their names are used in it. So some of these characters, most of these characters are actual people. So the black girl that's in it, that's supposed to be Dorothy Dandridge.
Mm.
And then is that I think that is who plays Hattie McDaniel. So Hattie McDaniel and Dorothy Dandridge are depicted in this as well.
Okay.
The only other character that may be false is the black guy who is the gigolo,
Gotcha.
who comes out as gay. That's the only character that they are claiming is not real. So they
Mm.
added it. So the whole premise of this is, if you have not seen Hollywood, the series is they're really depicting what could have happened. So the Rock Hudson character. So if Rock Hudson was allowed to be gay at the time he was entering Hollywood, his life may have turned out totally different because
Mm.
he may have been able to meet someone and be with just that one person and not feel that he had to pretend to be straight while, you know, philandering and eventually catching HIV and dying. So it kind of gives a what if scenario throughout all of these characters' lives. You see the black writer, the screenwriter. What if he was given an opportunity to actually write and then not only get the opportunity, win an award? What would
Mm.
that have been like? If Dorothy Dandridge would have actually won the award, versus Hattie McDaniel being the first, and
Mm.
what would that have looked like? It was just watching it was jarring because this ain't what happened. Y'all know this, right? But there were too many real elements that were
Mm.
added and then kind of pivoted. The truth was kind of pivoted a little bit to kind of show what would happen. But if you only on episode 3, it's about to get it's not as wild as say like P Valley or
Yeah, no,
um
no. I'm just
but
saying. I
it's
respect.
spicy.
I will tell you this though.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene in the movie where there's a young, up and coming producer, script writer, screenwriter who's
The
trying
black
to get.
guy?
Who's no, not the black guy. The one who is in the relationship with Dorothy Dandridge.
Okay.
And
Okay.
they talk
Yeah.
about he had already seen the actress, but they talk about the story of
Mm-hmm.
the Asian actress who's
Yeah.
very well known, who had the opportunity to be in this part,
Yeah.
and it comes down to this: they didn't cast the Asian girl in the part, even though they clearly understood that she was the best person
Perfect.
for the
Yeah.
part. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
cast her because they didn't feel like the movie would have been a hit with an Asian lead.
Right.
The woman that they replace her with, who is a white woman, ends up winning the Academy Award
Mm-hmm.
because they made that switch. And in that meeting, there's a conversation around who's right.
Yeah.
Is it like who said it? Who's leading who here? So
Mm-hmm.
you got the studio exec who's saying, "Look, we've done the research, we've done the marketing research, we've tried it before, we know what business is going to be like in this area." And then
Mm-hmm.
there's the other flip side of that is like, well, how much, like, how much engagement have you done? How much
Mm-hmm.
reaching out have you done? And then there's this idea that, like, no, like and this goes back to what you were saying, Nate, we
Mm-hmm.
could show the world how to be better, right?
Yeah.
Like we can depict what they think is best, or we can show them how things can be better, and
Right.
how things that they can't fathom right now can actually exist. And that's a very, very important conversation, I thought, that they had very early on, because I think that was in like the second or top of the third episode.
Yeah.
But that's where it really caught my interest. And this is a show, Nate, that I know you like because
Yeah.
it catches you in that first episode. Like there's
Yeah.
no need for me, and I think I've said this a couple episodes ago, we talked about it. I'm willing to wait 2 or 3, 4 episodes for things to get going. This is not one of those
And
shows.
they get you in that first
Right
the
into the first
opening.
episode.
Not even the episode, but the opening.
You just keep moving.
I'm liking how Netflix is doing this thing where they are forcing all of the shows to have like this opening montage that becomes like a theme throughout that series. I don't know if it's Netflix or just people are starting to do that now, but it just feels like a Netflix thing because it helps you to ease right into the next episode. And it is not like a hard stop. It kind of takes you right back. And now the storylines are so connected now where it's not something where it's situational. Everything leads. But as you watch the rest of this season, you're going to see a lot of familiar stuff that you've seen, that you've experienced, stuff that you've read about, history. You're going to start seeing a lot of things, but nothing is as it seems. Not that it's always a hidden agenda, but the truth has been put on its side. Ryan Murphy is incredible when it comes to telling a story from a warped perspective and making it make sense and holding us accountable. Like when you watch something from Ryan Murphy, you just want to do better for people or do better by people. Like that's how I always, and some of his stuff is a little out there, but it always makes you feel like I need to do better in life. Like I just need to do a little bit, just do a little bit better. But it really it's a good season. So once you finish watching this season, then we can probably come like just address it a little bit in another episode. But it I like quirky stuff, but this is it forces us to like really. So the Marilyn Monroe character, the Dorothy Dandridge, the Hattie McDaniel isn't really. She's only in this movie to kind of balance out Dorothy Dandridge because
Mm,
Dorothy Dandridge is the new face, and she's kind of like the hope that Hattie McDaniel worked towards being. So
mm-hmm.
it really just um it just it's I like stuff that depicts where we are in life because this stuff is set in a time period where we didn't have many choices, but it's still relevant to what many of us are going through right now, you know, in our local art scenes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it feels like. But whew, it's this starting to take a toll on me. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah. So I think
Mm,
we got this last one.
we got two more. You
Two
want to
more.
just yeah. So our last two are our TV picks, which is the People versus Simpson.
Okay. You want to do that
Uh,
one first?
yeah, and then the second one is the Good Place.
Okay. Okay.
So the People versus OJ Simpson. Uh, Ryan Murphy again coming
Yeah.
to TV and doing it huge. You got to watch it. I can't even the acting is all top notch. I mean,
Yeah.
um,
I just love Cuba Gooding.
I
I hate
really
that
do,
he's
yo.
become
I hate that Cuba Gooding Jr. has become like a pariah within the black community as far as like his films and whatnot. Um, damn, this is
I'm
crazy.
hating that his outside reputation is starting to muddy just the variations of because he was like I wouldn't even call him the underdog, but he was the one that you really didn't pay attention to, and then bam, he was in this, and then he was
Mm-hmm.
in. So doing something like this movie, it validated to me again, like he is good. He's even in a season of
American Horror
American Horror
Story,
Story, and I'm sitting there like,
and I really enjoyed how they did that season.
right. And you don't normally see versatility from
Mhm.
male actors, especially black male actors.
Yeah.
They're never really given them opportunities to be versatile. They normally pigeonhole them into a certain genre, and if they go outside of that, it normally doesn't look good on them because it's not directed well.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
this one was. Do you remember where you were when this case was going on?
I remember no, but I don't remember where I was when it was going on. I
You
remember where
probably
I
was like in
was.
elementary
I
school.
remember where I was at. I remember exactly where I was at when
Yeah,
the verdict came down.
yeah.
I was in middle school.
You
I
was
was
in
in the
middle school. How old are you?
elementary. Was I middle school? No, I was in
You were
elementary school.
Yeah, I was about to
I
say
was
you
in
was in because I
elementary
was in
school.
middle school.
I was in I was in the fifth grade.
Yeah, because
Yep. And
I was in middle
we were
school.
at recess, and we used to come out the cafeteria door at recess, and there was like one door, but there was like six doors that led out, right? You know how you
Yeah,
remember the old Baltimore City schools, there'd be an entrance. It's like
yeah,
six doors, but only one was open, right?
right.
So the back of the cafeteria leading out to the playground, there was like 6 or 7 doors, but normally only one door was open. And we were out on the playground, and then the cafeteria staff opened up all of the doors, and they had like a radio that they brought out to the steps, to the edge of the steps, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody crowded around while they were delivering the OJ verdict. I was at school, and everybody
Yeah,
went bananas when OJ got off.
many people connected this story to the Rodney King
Mm-hmm.
story, and in terms of like vindication, it just felt like it was like
So I think Nate is having some trouble. His mic went on mute. So if you haven't seen The People versus OJ Simpson, Nate, you back with us?
Yeah, I'm back with you. I'm back
Okay,
with you.
go ahead.
Yeah. It just I just remember I don't know. It just felt weird watching this. Um because again I went to white school. So we would watch it like you said during the lunch lady
Mm-hmm.
was a black lady and she would have the TV on in the cafeteria and most of us would come in uh come into the little hall that we were in and watch it, and you could tell how uncomfortable many of the teachers were and the faculty because we only had one. I don't even think we had a black teacher yet
Yeah.
in middle school, but it was I could tell how uncomfortable white people were and angry at the same time. Like what you see right now amongst them, this is what it felt like during that trial.
Hmm.
And it was such a reverse from when Rodney King happened
Yeah.
that it was just I I I don't even think it was an idea of whether we thought he did it or not. I think many people wasn't even thinking that. We just wanted him to get off.
It's just wanting to see. Well, you want to see justice applied fairly.
Yeah, but I don't even think we was thinking like that because up until
We
that
might
point,
not have
it had
been.
been so unfair. This
Mm-hmm.
was at a point where it was just this was what the 90s, the mid
Yeah.
90s. So it was just a space of we were starting to see a lot more violence, a lot more drug activity, a lot more police issues.
Hmm.
And then coming off the Rodney King, like years later, it was just I don't think people even cared whether he had did it or not. It was especially black women. Oh, I just remember the lunch lady going off. You know, the days of the trial, watching it. I just remember her going off and just not caring that none of these white people in the school could get her fired. I just remember her being that carefree and her talking at the TV. Like I would just and we would stand outside and kind of watch it with her, but it was just I just remember her not and she was a younger black girl because
Mm-hmm.
it was everything about see that's why you don't deal with them white girls. And that's what she would tell us that. See, that's why you don't deal with those white girls. Cause this is what happened to you. And it would be like white teachers standing there like and it was just it's funny now but at that time it just seemed real serious and I never believed he did it but I don't think it was ever a thought like of whether he did it or not but this was a good I think all the characters were spot on and I loved legal anything I love to watch a legal TV show or a legal
Mm-hmm.
movie because I just like that interaction between lawyers and a court case. But they all of these characters were spot on, and maybe we can watch the documentary at some point as well because it really did tell us where all those characters were doing this in terms of what they felt, the pressure that they felt, kind of reliving this moment, and how in kind of like the lady who played Marsha Clark said she kind of felt the weight that the actual Marsha Clark felt because the set turned into kind of a like who did it? Like they were making a decision all over again or fighting the case all over again. But yeah, I liked it. I liked it. Um, so the last one, are we still there? So we're gonna do the last one. Um, we're gonna go to the last one, and that is let me find it. Let me find it. Let me find it. Oh, A Happy Place. Hello? So Happy Place is the last one that we're going to talk about. And this TV series was, I think, something I needed during this pandemic. Not that I was thinking about death a lot, but more so, um, I think everybody questioned mortality a little bit throughout this pandemic, and I think uh, I think this piece. So the Good Place. Just a little synopsis of it if you haven't seen it. It depicts life after death. So it doesn't really deal a little bit. It deals with the death part a little bit, but these people wake up in what they think is purgatory, or rather, they think they're in the good place. And at some point, the characters kind of rally together, and the whole point of this is to get them to be on a collective mind, and it's supposed to be torture. So the good place is really a bad place, and it's really what they never call it heaven or hell, but we understand what the good and bad place is. But they're supposed to be in a um they're supposed to be in a good place, but things start happening that um would not or should not be happening in the good place, like the fact that some of the characters are there and they're not supposed to be there, or they are there with the understanding that somebody with their same name died at the same time, or some crazy coincidence like that, and they ended up there, and a couple characters are there like that, but they all end up realizing that they were all is a point system to get into heaven, and if you don't get enough points, you end up in a bad place, and somehow the rating system was off whack, or it was out of sorts for some reason, and they all realize that they are not in the good place. Throughout this series, they kind of gain a level of consciousness, and every time the character Ted Danson, he plays like the architect for this space that they're in, and he ultimately feel, and he's not human, mind you, he's in a human form, but he realizes that what they're doing is wrong and that they should fix the system. And all of these group of people that you see up on the screen right now figure out a way to fix the system, and they, the fast forward us to the end of it. We learn that we learn kind of what it is to be a good person, and that idea of kind of saving up points to get to heaven is not the best way of doing things. Just being an honest good person is your best bet. And all of them end up in the good place because they kind of work together in some shape, fashion, or form to get themselves there as a group. This small group of people get themselves there, and it's just a journey that we all go on in this first season of this show, and I'm very curious as to what this last season is going to be about. But we learn so much from we learn so much from uh we learn so much from them. We learn so much about what their stories are, what their how they died, how they came to be, what were their shortcomings in getting them to this space. But it's such a powerful piece. It's such a powerful representation of uh, what heaven is supposed to look like, what hell is supposed to look like, um, and it really dealt with, for me, and how I translated this to my real life. What am I true raw interactions with people, and uh how I guess how we treat each other. How does that matter at the end of life? At the end of our days, how does that truly matter to us? And it really spoke to many of my insecurities about life and immortality, um and what is to come. And I think it kind of calmed me down because I had a really bad fear of death going into this. And it was just a bad it was just a bad vibe I had, because you don't know, and it's all based off of not knowing what's after. And dealing with this pandemic, it really allowed me to deal with death in a space of being comfortable and not worrying about what's coming next and just living life. And it really helped me to I'm building my relationships with people differently now, as I meet new people, as I'm doing different uh, ventures in life, and even some of my old relationship. Forgiveness is definitely a piece that you find as a theme in here, and dealing with self. How do we deal with self? Many of us have been. This pandemic has been difficult for us because we don't really know how to deal with ourselves, and it really was hard. It's really been hard kind of dealing with self. And it really has helped us to just grow in a different way. So this is our last piece for this season, not this season, for this episode. The Good Place. Um, it really just it was a good watch if you are dealing with like being by yourself during this pandemic, or dealing with relationships, or even going through some spiritual things. It's a comedy, uh but it definitely speaks to how we treat each other, how we treat ourselves, what is good and what is bad, because it's all about perspective. um and what do we feel like life will be like, you know because in this film, in this series, we realize getting to the good place isn't the best bet, because how much of a good thing can you really take? Because then they go to an ultimate good place, the real good place, and it's supposed to be a difference where they don't have to live this life that we so the good place becomes what we think heaven is. So everybody gets their personal heaven, and the group is still together, and one by one, they feel this journey to go further. So they create this real good place where they could go, where uh, everything is at peace. You're at peace. So it doesn't say, you fall asleep, or it may be a different life. We may see what that life is next season, but um, it's a good piece. I suggest you watch it. But um, the binge worthy series isn't about good or bad TV, television, media. It's all about connecting us with history of who we are, the social uh, idea of who impact and contributions that we have, as well as social history, and this like the economical things that impact us when we think about film and television and documentaries and musicals and such. All this art is connected to life. Art imitates life as life imitates art. And it's really, really important to me because I'm an actor, I'm a director. So watching these films really inspire me to want more, to do more, and to be more. And I've finally taken time to cultivate my mind. One of the things that I had issues with as a director and as an actor, I didn't watch enough TV. I didn't watch enough programming. I didn't really live life a lot. So I'm getting to do that now. And I want to bring that to you in the form of a binge-worthy podcast to influence you to watch stuff that you wouldn't normally watch. I'm doing that. Or go back into that store chest of memory that you have and watch films that you grew up on or watch TV shows that you grew up on. This first season was just an exploration between myself and George. And next season, I want to be real purposeful and intentional in the things that we watch and not just randomly watching things. And even the arguments and and we're not mad at each other, but the arguments that come from myself and George uh, is out of our personal connection to these things. You know, it's powerful watching some of this. So some of this stuff is very heavy and it has deep meanings and deep connections to who we are. So this has been episode number 6 of the Binge-worthy podcast. I'm your host, Nate. We lost George for a second, but we'll be back next week. So stay tuned, stay locked in. Don't forget to follow us on social media. I'll put up our banner so you'll know exactly where to go to our Instagram, our Facebook page, and you're probably already watching us. So you're able to see us up on here. So this has been another episode of the Artist Exchange Binge-worthy podcast series. So stay tuned. New episodes every Tuesday. Look forward to us. Communicate with us. Tell us what you want us to watch, and we'll watch it. If you are an independent filmmaker, we're definitely looking for you as well. So drop us a line on our social media, or you can find us at Scene Work. That's SCENEWURK at gmail.com. Again, this is Nate, one of the hosts of the Binge-worthy podcast, and we'll see you soon. Peace out, people. And of course,